The second part of this chapter is looking at habitat. We looked at species, and so now we're going to look at where those actual species live. So what is habitat? It's a place where a population of species lives. And again, population just refers to the total number of individuals of the same species in a given area. Habitats change because of various factors, but one of them is because species can enter or immigrate into a habitat, or they can leave or emigrate a habitat. So immigrate is to enter, emigrate is to leave. Habitats provide some really important things. They provide food, water, temperature, oxygen, and minerals. Basically all of the supplies that a living thing needs in order to survive. So if a habitat does not provide these things, then organisms are either going to leave the habitat in order to search out the things that they need, or they are not going to be able to survive, so they're going to end up dying off. So habitats are really important in providing the things that living things require in order to stay alive. Most importantly, habitats supply biodiversity, so they function to allow all kinds of different species to survive and work together in those species relationships that we talked about in the last video. Biodiversity helps maintain stability, so the more biodiversity, the more stable a habitat is. It helps an ecosystem recover from disturbances, so things like, hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, those kinds of natural disasters that occur that are devastating to a habitat. The more biodiversity that was in there before the natural disaster, the higher the chance that it will be able to recover. So it's a good thing. This is a sign of a healthy habitat. And it contributes to resources and humans' needs and uses. So biodiversity provides humans with food, medicine. It gives us something to enjoy recreationally. So for those of you who are hunters or hikers or bikers, having different kinds of habitat gives us places to appreciate nature. And the amount of resources that we take depends on the biological productivity of the biome. So we can take a lot of resources from a habitat, humans can, but if the productivity of that biome is not very good, then we're going to destroy that habitat at a much faster rate than if we're taking resources from a biome that can regenerate those resources quickly. Some different types of habitats. These are also called biomes. So here are the most common identified biomes. There's some discrepancy on what is actually a biome depending on what scientists you talk to. Sometimes they combine them, but these are the general accepted ones: tropical rainforest, tropical seasonal forest, tropical savanna, desert, chaparral, grassland, temperate deciduous forest, temperate boreal forest, tundra, saltwater, and freshwater. Each one of these is going to have different organisms in it, different climate, different supplies that it gives to its living things. Habitats are characterized by climate. Average temperature and average precipitation is the number one criteria for putting or identifying a habitat. So obviously a tropical rainforest is going to have different temperature and precipitation than a temperate rainforest or than a desert. Climate is affected by latitude, so the farther that you move north or south of the equator, the colder the temperature gets. So oftentimes you'll see things like deserts or tropical rainforests closer to the equator. Climate is also affected by elevation. So the higher up you go, the colder the temperature, and again, that's going to support a different kinds of species than it does at the bottom of a mountain. So when you climb up the Rocky Mountains, the living things found at the bottom are different than the living things that are found at the top, because climate changes, meaning that certain organisms can survive and certain ones cannot. Habitats form in two different ways, and this is called succession. Succession refers to the formation of a new habitat or an ecosystem. Primary succession refers to starting from nothing and then an ecosystem developing over time. Secondary succession basically means that there was an ecosystem present, something happened that destroyed it. So let's say a wildfire or a flood. There is some kind of disaster that occurred that basically wiped out the vast majority of the ecosystem, but there's still some living things that are going to survive and be present, and then those things will continue to reproduce, and the ecosystem will grow again from those pieces of life that survived the disaster. So primary is starting from scratch. Secondary succession is starting with some ingredients that were left behind after some kind of ecological disturbance. Threats to species and habitats: extinction, fragmentation, invasive species, pollution, human population growth, overharvesting, and habitat destructions are the most common. Extinction just refers to the elimination of a species. Extinction occurs naturally in the world. The normal rate is 1 extinction per 10 years. Humans have accelerated that, however, to over 1,000 extinctions every year. So human impact is causing us to lose biodiversity at a much faster rate than what is considered biologically normal. Causes of extinction, mainly from global warming, from habitat destruction, are the two biggest causes for extinction. The global community puts extinct animals or puts a species on a list, and so not evaluated, data deficient, least concerned, near threatened, and then we get up here to the vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered. These are going to be extinctions that are threatened. And then extinct in the wild, meaning that there are no more of a species in the wild. There might be some in captivities, zoos, or wildlife refuges, and then extinct. So once an organism becomes extinct, then they're gone forever. Obviously, they can't reproduce, they can't repopulate, and we lose all of the things that that particular species could give us and their role in the environment. Habitat fragmentation refers to the reduction of habitat into small isolated patches. So we basically take a big biome or ecosystem and we start breaking it up into smaller pieces. This is particularly devastating to large animals because they need large spaces, and that's why you see so many large animals on the extinct or extinct in wild list or endangered list, because habitat fragmentation is taking away the space that they need to survive. The main reason for habitat fragmentation is urbanization, or the building of cities. When we build cities in the middle of an ecosystem or a biome, then obviously we're fragmenting that ecosystem, and we're taking away some of the resources that the organisms in that ecosystem needed to survive. Large animals really devastated by habitat fragmentation. Also, very small populations are more vulnerable to catastrophic events in habitat fragmentation. They just don't have the numbers to be able to survive. Invasive species refers to non-native species that thrive in new territories that are devoid of predators, disease, or resource limitations, which basically means they have everything they need to continue to grow and reproduce and overpopulate because there's nothing to threaten or compete with. There are over 50,000 invasive species in the United States. Some examples you might be familiar with are Asian carp, purple loosestrife, which you see all over on the roadside here, and zebra mussels. Those of you who are boaters understand the damage zebra mussels can do. Sometimes invasive species can be beneficial, but the vast majority of the time, they are disruptive to an ecosystem. Pollution, air, water, soil pollution, basically due to pesticide, fertilizer, industrial pollutants, lead poisoning, and basically they're going to kill species that are very intolerant to pollution, and again, it increases the likelihood that species can become extinct. So when we pollute or we toxify their home or their habitat, they aren't going to be able to survive, and thus we start to lose species. Overharvesting is taking more individuals than reproduction can replace. Food and medicine. We overharvest to get food and medicine. Especially fish stocks is one of the most overharvested living things in order to provide us with food. Bushmeat, antelope, elephants, and primates are also overharvested. A lot of rules and regulations in different parts of the world in order to prohibit the killing of these types of organisms in order to prevent overkilling. Ginseng is another one that is really commonly overharvested. We're taking more from the environment. For instance, we're taking more fish, we're taking more ginseng than they can repopulate, and thus risking the chance of them becoming endangered as well. Habitat destruction, which includes clear cutting, deforestation, desertification, and coral reef destruction. Again, if you destroy the homes of living things and they don't get the things they need to survive, they won't survive, they'll die, and that will lead to animals or organisms becoming extinct. Some of the solutions to loss of species or habitats: nature preserves or state national parks to basically preserve the land, prevent hunting, and maintain the ecosystems. Fire management, sustainable grazing, raising wild species, managing urban development to prevent fragmentation, hunting and fishing laws for game species, and then the Endangered Species Act of 1973 for non-game species also makes it illegal to hunt or destroy endangered organisms. So ultimately, the question is that I asked way back in the first lecture video is species protection better than habitat protection? If you were looking at trying to save the planet, would you focus your time and effort on saving individual species? Okay, save the polar bear, save the penguins. Or do you think looking at saving habitats is a better plan? Save the rainforest, save the deserts. It's an interesting question because, let's be honest, it is easier to get people to invest in saving a species. You know, oh, polar bears are so cute, we should do everything we can to save them and to stop the polar ice caps from melting because that's killing the polar bears. But if we choose to focus on habitat, we're going to save a lot more than just one species. But it's not as appealing. Who wants to say, hey, save the polar ice caps? Nobody really cares about that. Save a polar bear? People care about that. So in one aspect, you're going to get a lot more buy-in from the general community. In another aspect, you're going to save a lot more species. So how is it that you should go about managing it? That is the question. You're going to have to answer that question on your test. Scan your notes, turn them in. Have a great day.